Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to go into a series of panel sessions. So this is the first one of those panel sessions. I will introduce our speakers in a moment, and I will ask them all to give some opening comments. But then really, this is also your session. So we will have lots of opportunity after we've heard from the speakers to come to you for your questions from the floor. So from now, please be thinking about the questions that you want to put to the panel, and I'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of the session. So we've already heard from the speakers that we've had today the importance of sharing data, and this session is called Making Data Sharing in the Public Sector Happen. So we're going to be talking about how do we actually create those systems and cultures where government data can be shared across organisational boundaries. I have to say that I joined the civil service in 1996, a long time ago. We were already talking about joined up government then, and it seems like we're still talking about some of those same barriers and obstacles being in place to sharing data. So we really want to drill down into how do we actually make this happen. I'm delighted that we have Alison back on the stage again. So we've already heard from Alison this morning. For those of you who arrived slightly late, Alison is the Deputy National Statistician and Director General for Data Capability at the Office of National Statistics. And then we have Dominic Legge, who is Deputy Director at the Government Strategic Management Office in the Cabinet Office. We also have Bill Roberts with us, who is Senior Partner for Government Data at one of our knowledge partners today, TPX Impact. And then last, but absolutely by no means least, we have Sue Bateman, who is the Interim Chief Data Officer at the Central Digital and Data Office in the Cabinet Office. So I'm going to ask each of our speakers in turn to give us some opening thoughts on this topic. And Alison, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good to talk again. And my main function on the first session was not to embarrass the Cabinet Secretary and ensure my career continues. I had a load of Graham Norton questions lined up, but Simon went down a very serious route right up front, so I had to roll back from all of those. This is a topic that we've been talking about for a long time. As Siobhan has said, I think we are making progress. I've just got, well, I'm not going to go through that slide, you'll be pleased to know, but any ONS presentation has to have a chart or two on it. But what you can see from a whole range of different use cases is that the use of data and the sharing of data is now common, if not default. And I think the journey we're trying to go on is to move from knowing how we can share data in both analytical and operational use cases, and I'll just mention a couple of examples, into it being common practice and a default nature of how government functions. So Siobhan also mentioned focus on joined up government. We've had joined up government in some fashion. We haven't yet had joined up data behind joined up government. So there's still plenty of work to be done on that. These examples show a whole range of sort of innovative uses of data, and we're getting more and more innovation in the way we use data. I still think we're not doing enough in the data sharing, and let me say a little bit about why that is, in my view. The incentives are all wrong for data sharing. I think it's almost as simple as that. We have to work beyond the incentives that exist within a very federated government model. And so when I'm asked about what gets in the way, is it culture? And my answer to that is, that's too easy an answer. It masks the real issues behind it. It's risk management of data moving from one place to another. It's agreed standards that we are all working to. So if I'm Department A, I can trust Department B because it operates to a series of standards I can recognize. And it's data governance because the ownership of data sticks with the sort of data controller perspective, and that makes it very difficult to use data effectively where the ownership still sits somewhere else. So these are things that we need to confront, and we need to confront it effectively. What does the future look like in terms of data and data sharing? This is why, still using my 3Ls model of linked, local, and longitudinal. And in the sense of linked, we've moved way beyond bilateral data sharing. We're now into multilateral data usage, really important. Local perspective, I mean both geographically local, but also personable. So people's impact, cost of living, inflation, looking at it from an individual level is now what data is focused on. And longitudinal, we don't do enough of it. the ability for us to be able to track and understand policy decisions over a period of time require more longitudinal data. So we need to invest more in the longitudinal data world and environment. That's enough from me to start with, I'm sure.
Brilliant, thanks Alison. And again, a really nice way to kick off, because I think you've raised things that maybe the audience will have thoughts on as well. So the incentives being wrong, risk management, the standards of data and data governance, all issues maybe that we need to work on when it comes to data sharing. Dominic, your opening thoughts.
Thank you. It's really tempting to sort of dive straight into some really specific detail, but I think it's important to outline some what I'll call meta conditions, if you will, that we really need to get right. I think there are three broad things that really unleash our ability to create the right data, to use that data and to manage that data well. And in each case, they are kind of slightly unsurprisingly the same things. Firstly, we need to change how we think about data. It really can't just be an afterthought. Pretty much everything we do, and Simon mentioned this, is at its heart also a data problem. Every system we use to deliver our work can either give us real insight into the domain that we're operating in, or it can make it really hard to access and federate that information. This is true right from the high strategic level, down to the operational delivery and frontline services. Within this, there needs to be a sort of kind of borrowing from language of network engineering, a control plane on which you can find out how that system is operating and performing and what sort of state it's in. Thinking hard about that sort of system you're operating and what that information is and who else may need to access it and how they get it, those should really be our first questions when we think about the systems we operate in the public sector. Too often we think of this as a really nice thing to have. Really, it's absolutely critical to how we should operate. Secondly, it's our composition. It's 2023, and somewhere in almost every public sector organization, we need to have a decent fraction of people who can do the hard engineering. At the moment, we just don't have that. We don't have enough. In quite a few cases, I would argue they probably need to be directly employed in that organization. You're going to need some really nuanced capabilities built with a close understanding of the problem domain, with a team who's going to stick around to make sure it really does what you need. There's a reason Google doesn't outsource the building of YouTube and Gmail. They really understand that that's where their core value comes from. And they back those efforts in an incredibly strong way. If data is our future, and I think everyone here believes that really it is, we need to do the same. Well, this means having people at board level who really understand some of what's going on in the data, who are from engineering backgrounds, don't just have a lot of data buzzwords to contribute to the conversation. And it means really valuing that expertise, and we're starting to do that. And it means paying for the right kind of talent, therefore. There really is no mystery in this at all. Third, it's about getting down to details and working through them, having a plan, backing the plan, persisting. Once you get down to the details, I mean sort of gory engineering details, it's all actually possible. If banks can share many millions of transaction records between them every minute of the day in an incredibly regulated environment, then government just has no excuses. But they've got commercial incentives. We don't in many cases. So we need to make a real effort to accelerate. Overall, I see reasons to be truly optimistic here. And I'm sure we'll get discussing some of the experiences of trying to make this sort of change happen. Events like today, initiatives like the One Big Thing focus on data this year, are incredibly powerful signals that we're properly underway. But until we get our composition right, and in some cases, fully reconceive of how we deliver our work, we've still got, in Russell Conwell's famous turn of phrase, acres of diamonds just waiting to be picked up.
Well, we're looking at a sea of diamonds.
Indeed.
Waiting to be. Thank you so much, Dominic. So really big things that you're putting out there about how we have to, I think it was echoing what Megan was saying. She said data is the lifeblood. You're saying change the thinking so that we see everything as a data issue. Looking at the composition, that's interesting. I'm going to come back to that in terms of follow-up questions. Looking at the composition, do we have the right mix of people to meet this challenge in the public sector and the civil service, and then really getting down into those details? Thank you so much, Dominic. Lots of food for thought. Bill, your opening comments.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, when I was thinking about some comments for this event, I was looking back at things I've been working on over the last, more years than I'd care to remember, and trying to tackle this problem and thinking, well, why haven't we got there yet? I found a talk that I gave in 2011 that I was talking about. It's important that we can find, understand, and use data to support better decision making. But I guess then I was giving that talk to 50 data geeks, and now we're in an event where the head of the civil service is saying essentially that we need to focus on this problem. And with my kind of list of things that I think that we should be working on, Megan touched on most of them in her talk on what CDO is currently doing. So I'm really optimistic, actually. Cautiously optimistic, but I think probably as Simon was saying, the COVID was a real game changer on this, just in raising awareness of both what needed to be done and what was possible. And I think there are slower moving trends that are starting to pay off, that the younger people coming into the civil service are more numerate, more data literate, have better skills. But what Dominic was just saying, I think it's absolutely essential that there's kind of some deep expertise in data within the civil servants in the departments, because it's so central to what we need to be doing that without that, you shouldn't be relying on people like me. It needs to be coming from the civil service itself. And the talk about the importance of AI and how quickly that's going to change our lives. I'm, I guess, kind of at the moment, I'm more fearful than positive about that. I think there are so many good things that it can do, but I feel that human weakness is going to mean that we're going to settle on the shiny things and just allow ourselves to forget the importance of what's behind it. And all of our better data for better decisions is a value chain, if you like. There's a whole series of steps of people working together, from working out what data is important to collect, to collecting that, to analysing it, to processing it, to disseminating it, to analysing it and using that to make a decision. The explainability of AI is an extremely fundamentally difficult question, but I think that value chain of where our data comes from is going to be more important than ever. And I think all the things that Alison just listed about the kind of ecosystem that we need to work on, I think those absolutely hit the mark, and it's kind of engineering that ecosystem of interacting responsibilities is the thing that can get over the problem that we've been talking about this for 20 years but not done it yet. But I guess one thing that I'd like to add as a note of caution on that, I think there are lots of moves in the right direction, but we're talking about data sharing, and I think the findability of data and accessibility of the data that you need is got to be where you start. But once we start getting that data from other departments, that's when the pain's really going to begin. And I think we need to make sure that when we're doing that, we're thinking about those sort of standards and interoperability. I was thinking that what's uniquely hard about government data, and I think it's the diversity of services that government provides. There are literally hundreds of different services that government is responsible for, and the number of organisations that have to interact to do that. With like 600 central government and public bodies, 400 odd local authorities. It's too big to ever have one central solution that's going to do it all, and so sort of central-ish solutions will obviously play a part of that, but we've got to be thinking more like a kind of almost a sort of web architecture mindset, where we're defining standards and looking at interoperability. And then I guess, just to conclude, it's a big problem and it's slow moving, so we've got to focus on some successes along the way and just remind ourselves why it's worth doing. And I had a small involvement a couple of years ago in some work that Alison's team did on, as part of the integrated data service work, to put together a climate change dashboard. And at the start I was thinking, all right, we all know how to get some data and make some charts. What's the big deal? And then as it went on, I realized just how powerful a tool that was for communicating what this was all about. because it involves getting data from lots of organizations who are carefully managing, collecting high-quality data on different aspects of climate change. There was a team that got that together, it kind of harmonized it, made it into a sort of machine-readable resource, and then people went through careful design of how you're going to communicate that to the public to try to explain all aspects of a very complex problem, both in an engaging way, but in a way where you could dig down to really see some of the core details. And you know, it ended up being remarkably well appreciated by lots and lots of people. And I think more things like that are a great way to just remind people why we're doing it all.
Great, thanks. But it's really nice that we were already hearing about good examples of kind of where data's made a difference, and in so many different policy areas. So we had, obviously, during COVID, we heard a lot about what was done there. We had the modern slavery one, now you're bringing climate change, so it's across the whole width of policy areas. But really nice to hear some optimism there on not just kind of leadership, as you're saying, Simon's here today, so leaders are really understanding this and are really supporting the agenda, but also, as you said, the new recruits may be coming in, probably more understanding, more data literate as well, so getting that from both ends. I might come back to what does it mean for those of us who maybe are in the middle when we talk about some of the questions. But a note of caution that you bring in there on AI, so a little bit fearful that maybe we might get distracted by the shiny elements of AI and forget some of the fundamentals. And then again, you're bringing up as well those issues around standards and interoperability and how just the sheer diversity of our number of organisations, the amount of data that we have in itself is a challenge. So thanks again. Lots of things for the audience to be thinking about. Sue, your thoughts?
Morning, everybody. Now, how do I build on the points that have been raised already? Because there are some common themes emerging here. I mean, the first thing is data's been around for a long, long time. You could say through to, I guess, the Doomsday Book and the Magna Carta and Florence Nightingale mapping the
cave
Crimea.
painting, surely. I mean,
Yeah, and
you're
cave
looking at
paintings. So I suppose that's the first point is kind of it's not new. And in all of our work, whether you are kind of in the middle, senior decision maker, expert who is building the services, policy maker, operational frontline worker, somebody working in corporate services and government, there are elements of data that we will all use, maybe without even thinking about it in our everyday work. And I guess what we're talking about through this and through One Big Thing and other events this year is how do we harness the understanding of the potential of data, turn that into something kind of practical reality around where we want to go, and recognise that it is something that we all have to be in together. Now, I've now been working in this space for probably just over a decade, and I was lucky to go out to a summit in Estonia last week where a lot of the conversation was around AI, generative AI, ethics and responsibility, because it was a government and civil society type event. But it kept coming back to a lot of the points that Alison, Dominic and Bill have made already around a couple of fundamental things. So the capability, and I'd like to add to that kind of the community spirit that we need to kind of really strengthen and foster. So without going over everybody's points again, capability for me is not just about the people and the resources that we need, and recognising where industry is going in terms of the skill sets that we have to keep pace with the kind of ever-developing skill sets that we need in this space, as well as in those roles where you might not be the data engineer, you might not be the data scientist, but you are integral to the delivery of that policy or service. The second is around kind of the tools and technology, and Megan referenced a little bit around legacy and the rest of the digital and data roadmap. They're all integral to helping make data sharing really effective. And then finally, the other area for me is around kind of the guidance and standards, and as has been mentioned already, finding those areas that are absolutely critical in terms of joining up government, joining up the data for the purpose of delivering better services, for delivering better policies, better and more timely statistics, etc. and so that's the capability bit, but they feel kind of formal in what, the different bits of the centre or different kind of specific roles within an organisation might put in place. They're kind of the governance around the data. I think there's a lot that we are doing and more that we can do around community. So there's a lot of data-related communities, there's a lot of policy communities. We need to be using those informal communities to share the lessons, to share the best practice, to enrich the kinds of frameworks that we all want to be working to, and find a way to mix those communities as well, which is why things like One Big Thing are going to be so great in terms of fostering that conversation between different people.
Thanks, Sue. So I like what you said there about the challenges to harness the understanding of the potential of data and then somehow use that to implement and put into practice good practice. And also what you said at the end there, because I think we do have a mix of people in the room from different professions. So how do we get communities across the civil service and the public sector talking to each other and sharing good practice? And just getting some of those basics right, as you said, around the standards and the interoperability. I am going to come to the audience in a moment, but firstly, thank you to all of you for your great opening comments, that you've given lots of food for thought. A couple of questions that came up from me just to start the conversation. So I was really interested in the way that you phrased it, Dominic, about the composition. And I just wonder, all of you, your thoughts on, we're obviously here today because this is part of a training up kind of within the civil service. So regardless of whether you sit in a data profession or a policy profession, everybody in the civil service is being required to do kind of one day on data training. But obviously there's a lot more needed on data training. So what's the right balance if you think the composition, or maybe you disagree with Dominic, maybe you think the composition's fine, but what's the right balance in terms of training up internally and then trying to recruit in experts? And is it even possible to recruit in experts where we just can't pay what they're going to be offered in the private sector? Dominic, I'm going to come to you first, because this
I
was
get
your...
right for reply. Thank you. The point about sort of pay is interesting, because I have a bit of insight into what you pay an engineer in the civil service, what they get paid in sort of an energy company in the UK, what they get paid at Google, Facebook, other very large tech companies. I'm talking about really competent mid to senior level engineers. We are not fully competitive, so I would say that at a mid to senior level engineering kind of level, you maybe pay £15,000 a year under the odds. We could make up that gap. But it turns out that you can find people. I mean, I've got one of my crack engineers in the audience today, I've recognized. You can find people who are incredibly dedicated to doing some of the stuff we get to do, because we don't get to do anywhere else, firstly. But also, there's a thing there about making sure the conditions in which they work are right. They need to feel they're part of a community of people who actually understand the sorts of things they do. We need to value that expertise. We can't just sort of say platitudinous things that they turn around and say, like, wow, what do you actually understand at the most sort of simple first approximation what happens inside a database? And you're a responsible owner of some very serious government capability. I would sort of encourage anyone who is in that position to go and do some really basic digging about what they are running in really gory detail. I think that's critical. I don't think it's rocket science. It's the sort of thing where everyone in this room, everyone that I know in the civil service can get a really good first approximation understanding of these things and understand limitations. There's sort of a series of environmental factors that make it hard to get engineers into the civil service. Hiring timescales, security clearances, that's really awful because it can take up to 6 months between an advert and getting through the door, but the recruiter that's phoning them up and saying, come to work at this flashy startup, that's tomorrow morning, turn up and you're ready to go, and that's really problematic. I don't think there are silver bullets there. Yeah. There's something about having a pipeline that we maybe don't yet have the right adjustments in the dials for in some of these spaces.
Yeah.
And then there's also the sort of the credibility of the process you hire these people by. They want to work somewhere where they really feel that they're going to go and work in an exciting engineering team. It's a multidisciplinary sort of thing, and we, drop people into a place where they're kind of isolated compared to if they went to a Facebook, a Google, an energy firm. There are a lot of things there to get right.
Thanks, Dominic. Alison, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mostly agree with Dominic. A little bit of contention is always a good thing. I'm going to also point to, and I'm sure Bill will appreciate, the fact that we have partners out there who also can provide the capability and the capacity. And I think as a civil servant of some 25, 30 years, we've never really cracked working with the private sector as well as we could and should. And we've got colleagues here today that we should spend more time getting to know. There's also, I think, a question about composition within DDAT and composition across the civil service more generally. In DDAT, I led the function for a period of time, and when I was leading it, I inquired just how much data skills do we have within the composition of the 17,000 at the time, and it was 5%, which was clearly not enough. And so since then, a lot more work has gone in through CDDO and other colleagues to building that capacity. And I think data architects, data engineers are the place to be, if you like. If you're thinking about what are those in-demand roles for the future, they are very, very clearly in that space. But also, it's not just about uplifting within DDAT, it's ensuring that across the civil service capability, just in the same way that you don't have to be in comms to know you need to know a bit about comms. You don't have to be in finance to know you have to be able to add up and spend money wisely. And the same is true of digital and data. And Dominic, the question you asked, do you understand what's going on within a database? And my question I ask anyone is, do you know the difference between structured and unstructured data? Because every time you create a spreadsheet, you can either create it in a structured data way, brilliant, or you could just stick a little heading in or something that breaks it up into unstructured data, and then it's not usable. And it's those kind of basic skills that would be really useful for us all to be able to impart.
Thanks, Alison. Sue, and then I will come to you, Bill, but Sue, your thoughts. I'm particularly interested as well, maybe, in people who have been in the civil service maybe for 10, 15 years, and now, on top of, like you said, having to know a bit about comms and finance, they're being asked to know all of this now about data as well. It's quite a daunting prospect.
Yeah, I think I'd go back to one of Dominic's other remarks, though, about we need to see and understand that data is integral in anything really from the outset. If we kind of think about what Simon said about ministers, and some of you who will be in that space of having to produce dashboards on tap may not be, entirely happy about that, but that is the reality that at those senior levels now, there is an expectation of being not just presented with an old-fashioned kind of policy submission that has some of the things like the presentational issues, the handling issues, and the legal issues. They're also expecting where's the evidence and where's the data underpinning that. And so I think, that's the first thing to recognise is that it should be there, whether it's kind of development of a policy or a new service, because whenever you're going up through that decision-making route that we're all part of, there will be a request and an increasing expectation around where's the data alongside, can you tell me if there's a legal risk around that? So that's kind of the first point. And then kind of building also on the fact of this should be multidisciplinary in the sense that you want everybody to have enough awareness and understanding to be able to ask those kind of questions. And I kind of say, especially in the policy space, so for example, if a team is looking at how do we use some data analysis to look at what we do around the Spotting Families programme, for example, in DLUG, you would expect the policy folk to be integral to that, to be able to advise the data scientists around where some of the insights might and potential options might be leading to unfair or discriminatory kind of recommendations to ministers. So I think that's the starting point. And then I suppose the last thing that I'd say is we focus a lot on kind of hiring the experts from outside, and I think that's been quite a long-term focus now that we've had, certainly since I started working in the data space. I think we could be creative around it. So one of the things that I think has been going now for maybe about 8 or 9 years is the Data Science Accelerator Programme, Alison, that's run out of the Data Science campus in ONS. That was literally a few of us sat around a table going, what do we do to train? Are data scientists really unicorns? What do we do to train up our group of amazing analysts? Let's get 5 Macs and let's get 5 volunteers and get some mentors. And that scheme now must have taken hundreds of people through that early start in kind of making the step from analyst to data scientist. So I think there's always other ways we can be creative as well in thinking about the kind of the capability issue.
Thanks. Interesting, we did some research with Canadian civil servants about briefing ministers, and I think 20% of them are now using ChatGPT to write their submissions for ministers. That's quite interesting. Bill, I do want to come to the audience, but very quickly, your thoughts as a kind of a provider, from the private sector, your thoughts on the skills that you find within the civil service and where you think the private sector can add value.
Yeah, so I think that there's 2 aspects of it that I wanted to mention. One was something that Alison was saying about, I guess, what the civil service is like as a buyer, and looking back at lots of things that we've done with government organisations, you can see some that have gone really well and some that have gone less well. I'm not going to mention any of the less well ones, but a good example of something that we're doing at the moment is going really well, I think, was with the Department for Levelling Up, because the team there, there's a kind of clear goal of what we're all trying to achieve. The team of a mix of civil servants and private sector suppliers is acting like one team. There's a lot of data knowledge on the buyer side, so everyone can see the right way to make decisions. So that's, there are lots of examples of that across government, but that's one that I've come across with it, but it's working really well. And so where those things happen, then you can be reasonably confident that it's going to work. And the other aspect was on, I guess, sort of engineering skills in the civil service. And I'd agree with Dominic that while there might be a bit of a pay gap, it's not as big as you think. No one in Britain is competing with West Coast USA prices. And I spend a lot of time with software engineers and data engineers, and a lot of them are quite motivated by doing useful stuff. And I think that civil service environment where you're trying to make the country better motivates a lot of people. And also, they're highly motivated by just being able to get their job done. So optimizing for developer happiness, which is quite simple. Give them a good machine, let them install stuff they need. And sometimes those kind of hygiene factors I think it's getting better, but sometimes those are tricky in a civil service environment. And that may come back to the kind of, the balance of sort of risk and effectiveness on how you do that.
Thanks, Bill. So we've gone down a bit of a kind of side track there on people, but I think it's part of the how do you get data sharing to happen? You need the right people in the room. So over to the audience for questions. Who would like to ask? We've got a lady down. I'm going to take 2 at a time. I'll come over there in a minute. We've got a lady here and then the gentleman there. We'll take these 2 first.
Hi, it's Madeline from DEFRA. I think it's very encouraging that you want to do cross-government, cross-department working, which is something that I have to do quite a lot in DEFRA. And it's quite easy to do when you're working with other DEFRA departments because they're very easy to find. They're your colleagues and what have you. The problem is when I have to go to another department, and I've had to go, for example, to the DVSA, I've had to go to the Environment Agency, and it's very, very hard to find out who it is I need to talk to because I can't get into their internal website. I go to the gov.uk and then it takes me to their public website and I can't find anybody. I can't find numbers, I can't find email addresses, I can't find teams, I can't find anything. So how am I supposed to improve my data sharing and cross-government working when that fundamental connection between the departments isn't there? So what plan is there for improving that?
Fantastic question. So even at the very first hurdle, you're kind of blocked from even finding out who you want to talk to, how you get hold of them. And then there's a gentleman just in the row behind. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Rob
Great.
from HMRC. Back in 1984 was the first Data Protection Act. So that's nearly 40 years ago. And it probably took government about 25 years before it realised that security was really important, and it's taken another 15 years for it to be the only thing that matters. And it's often the security risk that is put up against data sharing. What are the big landmark things that you think we need to put in place to have a data sharing to combat the security?
Great, thank you. Two brilliant questions there. So Rob's question was, it goes back to risk management, I think. It's that kind of what do you do to be able to share data securely, being aware of all the kind of data protection legislation in place. Okay, you can answer one or both of those questions, and we've got lots of other questions, so we'll have to keep the answers quite brief. Sue, I'll start with you.
On the first one, it won't be the entirety of the answer, I'm afraid, Madeline, but part of the idea of the data marketplace that Megan referenced was around having a front door to understand about what data assets there are across government, and each of those data assets will have a designated owner, so there'll start to be some naming around that. And then Rob, on the security issue, as you know, because you're involved in a lot of these conversations, there is now a data and technology architecture authority that we've set up that's starting to do some work to look at those patterns and principles around security, because I think that's where we need to go. It's kind of having a common understanding about both privacy risk assessment and security risk assessment in government.
And this is a huge barrier, because lots of people tell us they're very scared of sharing the data in case they breach any legislation or anything. Alison, your thoughts on either of those?
Yeah, Rob, I couldn't have planted the question better that I didn't. There are standards such as the critical national infrastructure that seems to work well. It's accredited by colleagues, GCHQ, NCSC, but we don't recognise it necessarily across departmental boundaries. So I want to move to a world where one department recognises CNI as decreed by another department, so we remove those barriers towards additional requests time and time again. And the second is, we have critical national infrastructure. I want to see critical national data assets, because in effect, that's what we're getting at here, the importance of data collectively to be used. Really, really important questions. And Madeline, I think you've had a bit of the answer from Sue, and I would also add, let's use the networks and the communities of practice that you have, because in reality, government is a matrix model, isn't it? You have your departmental silos, but also you're part of a function or you're part of communities of practice that operate across departments. So whatever function you're within, get your colleagues there to make the connections to other members of the function in those departments, and then get that silo back down. Happy to chat to you afterwards on that.
Dominic, did you want to add anything?
I'd like to come to Madeline first, and just sort of, maybe I take a slightly different view to Alison on this. I think it's completely baffling that we do not have, and haven't revitalized a people finder that we used to have, a basic organizational hygiene tools that in most organizations just taken as given. And partly that's excusable due to sort of the way that accountability is structured inside government organizations, institutions. But really it's not excusable in sort of practical terms. And I will go further than just to think about it as like, a people finder. It's what is the basic structure of this organization, who does what here, what domains they work in, what expertise they have. That's the kind of thing that's really easy to fill out for each person in this room. You could, if you had such a tool, you'd go in and do it in 5 minutes and it'd be done. It's really about thinking about what we do in the organizations we're in as systems. And the same thing plays out again and again if you think about how do we get advice to ministers with all the right people being involved. Estonia is doing some wonderful things around digital memoranda, for example. We should be doing similar things. I know there are real initiatives out there starting to sort of get some traction. On the security risk side, I think it's really interesting because my number one thing would be we don't do enough stuff in the cloud. We think about a lot of stuff as being sort of on-prem data centers. It is remarkable the level of security you can get in the cloud today. If you really sort of inspect what AWS offers you, for example, I'm not sort of favoring one cloud over another. This stuff is pretty straightforward to do if you employ architecture best practices. And standards great, but what do they translate to in practice? In precise terms, what sort of AWS network stack do you need if you're going to be compliant? And that sort of thing is really hard to navigate. And we sort of roll over and let things be on-prem because it's easier. It then becomes harder to share. It becomes harder to see how you even might start sharing. There's a lot there that's really interesting. And the other side of that is get some professionals in, for heaven's sake. Get a pen tested by people who really understand security. If I sort of look at anybody who is running anything, my number one piece of advice, and I've been through several, is get a pen test, take the recommendations super seriously. Those will give you some, if not guarantees, pretty close to, because you see that tail of things you identify sort of tailing off to pretty random things about which headers you're forwarding that really aren't massive security risks in some cases.
Dominic, I'm just conscious we've got lots of questions, but Alison wants to come in.
I just wanted to, and I will be quick, we're having some interesting slight disagreements on this end of the table because I think it was schizophrenic about cloud. All the points you made around better security are absolutely right, but you lose some control to some extent, and there are some interesting legal questions around where the data is residing, and I speak from some recent personal experience we haven't yet resolved. So I think you're right, but we have to face up to it being a very different way of thinking.
But that's in sort of the data architecture space as well. Think about availability zones
and it's
and
risk
where
management
you're doing it.
as well.
Exactly. But there are real ways around that nowadays that we can actually implement.
I really like it when we don't have violent agreement on a panel. we can take this in the coffee break. You both be available in the coffee break. Bill, very quickly on any observations you've had on kind of this maybe fear of sharing data because of the legislation.
Yeah, no, a quick one on Rob's point. I also think that the pure security issues are basically soluble. It's not easy, you've got to be careful, but often it's the perhaps data protection or sort of privacy protection that's a harder thing. Perhaps we should make more use of the kind of privacy enhancing technology stuff that's coming out in the health space. So don't share everything, just share the bits that need to be shared. But also sometimes there's a fear of the other person's going to use it wrong. And I think the way to get over that is investing in your data asset as if it's something that will be shared. So make sure that it's got enough context with it, that it's well enough documented that someone else can use it reliably, maybe with a backup of talking to the expert. But it's the way that what we do with the data before we share it, I think, is part of the solution.
And it's an understandable fear, I think, because it takes a while to build up trust, doesn't it, with the public and how you use the data. And if that goes wrong, then you lose that trust very quickly. Thank you. Okay, so we had a question over here. And then I want to come to the back as well. I don't want to ignore the back. So the gentleman there with the beard with your hand up. Again, we'll take those two. Thanks.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Anna from the New Energy Department. I'm a sort of grade 7 general analyst trying to support other analysts who are trying to do data sharing or monitoring project. I've been looking for training that goes all the way from the data sharing through the data processing to the data communication end in one package, and I don't think that exists. I'd be very happy to be corrected on that. But it's also, because that comes back to the sort of how do we make data sharing public sector happen, because we need to know enough about GDPR, we need to know enough about data processing, we need to be able to do the end bit of the communication as well. And somebody needs to know enough about everything, but there isn't any training to learn to do everything. So.
Okay, great question. So is the training, kind of end-to-end training, available for people like you? And there was the gentleman there, if you want to put your hand up again. Do we have a microphone in the middle of the room? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Salman Kalar. I'm the Insight and Analytics Manager at Richmond and Wandsworth Council. So I'm not civil service, but a very keen observer of everything that happens in civil service, because we're quite a big user of your data. And one of the things I would like to, I think Alison mentioned local as a thing. So one of the things a plea I would make to government departments, you really have to think about where the action actually is happening. So if you want us to increase the uptake of benefits, you have to give us the data to be able to do that. And we can't always do that. And the lady in the front mentioned about getting in touch with people in government departments. Have a thought for local government employees who have no chance in hell of getting in touch with any of you. So if anyone from DWP, data governance is there, I'd love to talk to you. But how are you going to make it local where action is actually happening? And secondly, one thing on the legislation point of view, legislation hasn't kept up. It's much easier for us to get money back from people for fraud and arrears. It's very difficult for us to prevent people from going into hardship in the first place. So how are you doing that in terms of data sharing? Thank you.
Thank you. So 2 great questions there. Maybe a relatively easy one to answer maybe on, is there training available, the kind of end-to-end training available? We have a very persistent fly up here at the front. And then great question from Wandsworth Council. So how do we help central government and local government maybe talk to each other, communicate better, and can we use data on prevention rather than a cure? Sue, I will start with you again.
So unfortunately, I am not aware of any training that takes you exactly from end to end for your teams. I know that there are things that are available that have initially been rolled out for senior leaders, so data masterclass. I'll check what the plans are around further rollout, but it sounds like there's some feedback around essentially what probably exists on civil service learning and in other spaces in terms of those different modules that you need and signposting that through. So I can take that back as feedback. On the local, absolutely. I think we recognise that a lot of the early conversation was around how the pandemic was a step change. We did a lot of work on that around support to vulnerable people in GDS as was, and then actually a lot of the delivery was done through the local partners. So we recognise that as an area. Our community is open. Our various communities are open across the public sector. We do have some local representation. We are working from a data standards perspective on looking at standardising around supporting people with vulnerabilities that isn't in the legislation space. There are some objectives already under the Digital Economy Act that are useful in both the here and now and the prevention, but that is also a conversation that we're having at local and national levels around, is there another secondary bit of legislation that we need around early prediction and prevention?
Thanks. I see we've only got 5 minutes. It's flashing red here, so I'm going to ask Alison on this one, then we'll go to another question and I'll put it to everybody.
Yeah, on the end-to-end training, I think the lady said you were part of the analysis function or you're an analyst. I presume you've already checked out the section of GovUK for the analysis function. I don't think there's anything end-to-end either. So if you can grab me afterwards, I'm going to take that back. You'll take it back from the DDAT side. I'll take it back from the analysis side. So what we can do. Interesting question on local. We run something called ONS Local, which is the ability to work with local authorities looking at the entirety of the sort of statistical environment, both social and economic, around a local perspective. Because as you pointed out, you look at postcodes next to each other and you've got vastly different circumstances. So you have to be able to look at more localized focus. So subnational data is becoming that much more important. We're doing a lot of work in ONS on that. On the prevention point, just a general point, I believe we underutilize the powers of the Digital Economy Act. I chose to read the Act about a month ago. It took an awful long time. But the powers there extend to be able to manage policy choices for prevention. And I'd like to see us use the Digital Economy Act in a more progressive way.
Thanks. So we've got time for one last question. Okay, the hand right at the back there. I'm going to make our runners run right in the back. Thanks, Anne. Sorry. Give you some set. Just to say, I know there were lots of unanswered questions. Thank you so much for being so engaging. There will be lots of opportunity in the other sessions, and we'll be covering similar issues. So please keep your questions for those sessions. We will get through as many as we can. Thanks, Anne.
Can you hear me? It's
Yeah.
Sian Thomas from the Department for Business and Trade. I'm going to take you right to the other end of data sharing. Government says it shares data through APIs. Why has it been so hard to do this? We're 10 years in and we're still not sharing data through APIs.
Thanks. Okay, data through APIs.
Legacy.
Alison's desperate to come
Legacy
in.
is the problem. We can develop and create APIs more easily where we are developing new systems. But when we develop new systems, we still don't look beyond our own boundaries for its usage. So I want to see data architecture across departmental boundaries. Then we can get more APIs running.
Dominic, do you agree with Alison on this one?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
that's a
do. I
disappointment.
fundamentally agree. I mean, if you think about sort of how you architect a specific service that you're running internally,
Yeah.
and you look back to, you know, the 80s, 90s, noughties, you maybe didn't build the kinds of, you know, back-end, front-end architecture you need in order to then use those APIs elsewhere in the right way with right authentication, that sort of thing. And it gets quite technical quite soon. But we are progressively rebuilding some of those things. And as we do, well, those systems now by default, just kind of how the web now works, that split of responsibilities means that you start to build some of those APIs. Now, you may not reuse exactly those to, you know, consume for a wider group of people, but it means that you're bang in the space of having them and thinking about how you package up the data and send it to various types of clients.
Thanks.
So I think it's coming. I'm incredibly bullish and optimistic about where we get to in sort of 10 years as some of the programs currently underway mature.
But in the meantime, frustrating, I
There
think,
are
for people.
there are commercial API offerings that can be bolted on. We use a lot of those, so they should be looked up and utilised more effectively as well.
Bill, your thoughts? Is this kind of where you help out a little bit?
Yeah, no, I agree with Sian. I mean, it's not that hard. It's lack of will, I think. We've built and run lots of government APIs, and they work really well. I mean, it takes work, but I think it is basically a lack of recognition that it's worthwhile. So I agree. Let's do more of it.
So, Sue, final word on API. Are these kind of one of the basics that you were saying that maybe we should get right?
Yeah, and I know where Sian is coming from because we've had conversations around some of the particular issues that she and her team have experienced. We are doing a refresh of the API package, Sian, so get Michal and your team involved in that work, because part of it we recognise as being getting things up quickly and not thinking about the holistic, how are APIs designed and managed, rather a lot of them being kind of point to point.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for those questions. As I say, keep them coming throughout the rest of the day, but a huge thank you from me to our wonderful panel. I'm sure you will agree. So it's Alison, Dominic, Bill and Sue. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.